On Easter Sunday, the 20th of April 2025, Pope Francis made an appearance on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. It is the same spot where he had appeared for the first time after being named Pope in 2013. Pope Francis blessed the thousands present at St. Peter's Square and even treated them to a surprise. "Long live the Pope! Bravo!" the crowd shouted as Francis looped through the square in his open-top Pope-mobile. The act drew cheers and applause. On his way to the Basilica, Pope Francis met briefly with US Vice President J.D. Vance, who was spending Easter in Rome with his family. The Vatican said the meeting lasted just a few minutes. Francis, for his part, gave Vance 3 big chocolate Easter eggs to give to his 3 children. "I know you have not been feeling great, but it's good to see you in better health," Vance told the Pope.
"I know you've not been feeling great, but it's good to see you in better health."
Just a day later, on the 21st of April 2025, Pope Francis, history's first Latin American pontiff, breathed his last. Francis had charmed the world with his humility, his simple approach to life, his concern for the poor.
Well, definitely it's a sad moment right now for the Catholic Church. Pope Francis was revolutionary, was a pope that made great changes in the different beliefs of the church, of people. Even the way that he's going to be buried is going to be different from other popes. So it's definitely a sad time, and we'll see what awaits for the next pope. Right now, he's in our hearts. He's with God right now. So.
I don't remember the death of the previous pope in any case, but I feel that Pope Francis had a much greater impact on the political world than the last one. I think he was very committed to issues that concerned a lot of people, especially migrants. I found him to be a much more political pope than the previous ones. And I think he wasn't too afraid of disturbing even the Catholic Church itself with his speeches.
I think I've lived in my generation to see the 3 popes and him, and I think he was a very different pope. As somebody that I've grown up in a Catholic church, like his beliefs won't be something that I grew up like recognizing that the popes do. But he was a man of faith, and I was really sad, but I also feel like he was ready.
As the Pope had wished, I hope a world without war, filled with peace, become a reality. I believe the Holy Father is praying for the same wish in heaven.
On this special episode of WION Wideangle, we look at the life and times of Pope Francis. What is the legacy he has left behind? Who will succeed him? And what challenges lie ahead? Just a day after extending Easter greetings, Pope Francis, the religious head of 1.4 billion Catholics around the world, passed away. He was 88 years old. After being diagnosed with bilateral pneumonia on the 18th of February and suffering from age-related prolonged illness, Pope Francis died in the morning of April 21. His death has triggered a period of mourning in the Vatican. It also signals the start of a process of picking a new pontiff.
We can really only hope. We come from the Americas and things have not been so progressive over there. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that the next person gets in is more like him than his predecessor.
We really hope that the person who will succeed him will be someone who would hold his same ideals, because I think he achieved a great unification of the Catholic Church. We saw that in Latin America, and so we hope for him to be someone with similar ideals.
Well, I would say he sensed that the end was near, but we can only hope that we will find a successor who will continue what this man has done. The fact alone that the church is remembering that it's not just about splendor and glory, but that you have to care for people and nature.
Pope Francis was born Jorge Mario Bergoglio on December 17, 1936, in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The son of Italian immigrant parents, his father, Mario José Bergoglio, was an accountant for the country's railways. His mother was a homemaker. The young Bergoglio is said to have enjoyed tango dancing and worked as a nightclub bouncer and floor sweeper before graduating as a chemist. He pursued humanitarian studies in Chile and earned a philosophy degree from Colegio de San Jose in Argentina. Pope Francis was the first Jesuit pontiff and the first from Latin America to lead the Roman Catholic Church. After 13 years of academics, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was ordained as a priest in 1969. He took his final vows with the Jesuits in 1973. That same year, he was appointed provincial of the Jesuits in Argentina, a position he held for 6 years. Jesuit is a member of the Society of Jesus, a Roman Catholic order of religious men. After completing his term, he continued teaching theology as a professor. In 1986, he went to Germany to work on his doctoral thesis. On March 13, 2013, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis, was elected the 266th Pope, becoming the first Latin American Pope. This after Pope Benedict XVI gave up his ministry on the 28th of February 2013, a first of its kind after 600 years. Francis was elected the pontiff after Pope Benedict XVI resigned, citing health concerns. Francis's first papal trip was to Lampedusa, an Italian island that had become a beacon for asylum seekers and migrants. He celebrated Mass to commemorate migrants who drowned crossing the sea from North Africa. His papacy brought a series of firsts to the role. He was the first to take the name Francis after the medieval friar Saint Francis of Assisi, who vowed to live in poverty. Francis was the first Jesuit pope, the first to carry his own briefcase onto flights, and the first pope to travel in a small car instead of a limousine. He immediately shed most of the papal trappings and chose to live in rooms in the Vatican guest house instead of the papal residency in Vatican City. Francis sought to better adjust the church to the changing modern world. Francis challenged conventions followed by pontiffs before him. He pushed for a more transparent Vatican, connected to the concerns of common people and engaged with other faiths. Over his 12 years as Pope, Francis consistently raised the causes of migrants and the disenfranchised. His efforts to make the church more inclusive were welcomed by his supporters and many Catholics. But some conservatives pushed back as he veered from traditional teaching. He urged grassroots activists around the world to bridge the gap between rich and poor, while calling on richer countries to better protect the environment. As Western politicians moved to close their borders to refugees, Francis spoke up for them and other migrants. In February this year, he criticized President Trump's plan for mass deportations. Within Catholicism, he signaled a radical change in tone on some social issues. Francis wrote in his autobiography, "Everyone in the church is invited, including people who are divorced, including people who are homosexual, including people who are transgender." Given that the church did not recognize divorce in its canon law and previous popes had talked of homosexuality as a disorder, not a human fact, Pope Francis's statement was a departure that concerned the traditionalists. In July 2013, Pope Francis posed a question that marked a radical shift in the Catholic Church's treatment of gay people. He said, and I quote, "If a person is gay and seeks God and has goodwill, who am I to judge him?" He asked reporters in 2013, "Who am I to judge?" Just after this remark, Francis said homosexuality is still a sin under Catholic doctrine. But what made Francis's papacy historic is that, unlike his predecessors, he met with LGBTQ people from around the world and listened to their stories. Under Francis's leadership, the Vatican made significant policy changes, permitting transgender individuals to be baptized, serve as godparents, and witness weddings. The Church also approved of same-sex blessings. Though Francis's gestures of acceptance for LGBTQ people set an example for other Catholic Church leaders, it's unclear how far they will carry into the next papacy, because the fundamental Church doctrine remains unchanged. Pope Francis upheld the Church's traditional stance against abortion, calling it part of a broader throwaway culture. He granted regular priests the authority to forgive sin, which was a shift from past practice where only bishops could do so. He also rejected efforts by U.S. bishops to bar President Joe Biden from receiving communion due to his support for abortion rights, asserting that clergy should act as spiritual guides rather than political enforcers. Francis held firm on the Church's opposition to artificial birth control, but encouraged responsible parenthood, famously stating that Catholics shouldn't breed like rabbits. In 2016, Francis stated regarding women at risk from the Zika virus epidemic, suggesting artificial contraception could be permissible in such cases. Francis broke from prior church teaching by declaring the death penalty as unacceptable in all cases. He also condemned life imprisonment without parole as a hidden death penalty and solitary confinement as torture, calling for both practices to be abolished. Pope Francis sparked division in the Catholic Church by creating a pathway for divorced and remarried Catholics to potentially receive communion under certain conditions. The traditional Church doctrine maintains that Catholics who remarry without having their previous marriage annulled are living in adultery and cannot receive communion. While Francis didn't grant blanket permission for divorced and remarried Catholics to receive sacraments, he streamlined annulment procedures and encouraged bishops to assess cases individually, subtly opening a door long closed by traditional doctrine. Francis made significant strides in expanding women's roles within the Catholic Church through key appointments and legal changes. He appointed an Italian nun as prefect of the Vatican Office for Religious Orders, and another as head of the Vatican City-State Administration, positions traditionally reserved for cardinals. In another groundbreaking move, Francis appointed 3 women to the Vatican Office responsible for vetting bishop appointments. He also ensured women held half the seats in the Vatican's Economic Council. Despite these positive changes, Francis maintained the Church's position on an all-male priesthood and did not approve the ordination of women as deacons. Francis criticized global capitalism. He argued that economic systems often prioritize profit over people. He denounced the worship of money, called for universal basic income and better labor conditions. He once said, "This economy kills," affirming that his views were rooted in gospel teachings, not communism, despite criticism from conservative commentators. On environmental matters, Francis became the first pope to incorporate scientific data in church teachings. His 2015 encyclical Praised Be criticized global economic systems that exploit the poor and harm the environment. A 2023 update singled out the US for its emissions and warned that the world was approaching ecological collapse. The messages Pope Francis delivered on the climate and environmental crises were forceful and direct. He called the leaders of fossil fuel companies into the Vatican to hold them to account. He declared a global climate emergency in 2019. And in his final months, he held a conference on the economics of the common good. Francis made migrant rights a central focus. He condemned global apathy toward refugees and repeatedly called for nations, especially in Europe, to welcome them. The Pope's first papal trip was to Lampedusa to honor drowned migrants. He brought refugee families back to the Vatican from camps in Greece and Cyprus. He even criticized border walls and declared that building them was un-Christian. Pope Francis took a stronger stance on nuclear weapons than previous Catholic leaders, declaring that both possession and use of nuclear weapons is immoral. This marked a significant shift from the Church's prior acceptance of nuclear deterrence under strict conditions. These positive changes and positions defined Francis's papacy as one of significant reforms while maintaining more Catholic teachings. Even though his reign was marked by efforts to make the Church more inclusive, it also made him a controversial figure, particularly in the United States, where conservative Catholicism was often intertwined with right-wing politics. Francis's papacy was also marred by the sexual abuse crisis. In 2002, the Boston Globe, an American daily newspaper, published a series of articles exposing the scale of child sexual abuse in the local Catholic Church. 11 years later, Francis became Pope. Wave after wave of abuse revelations continued to crash at the Vatican's doors, amid mounting anger among the faithful. When Pope Francis took over in 2013, the Catholic Church was embroiled in a global scandal over child sex abuse by priests, and the institution's attempts to cover it up. In January 2018, Pope Francis's trip to Chile, where a clerical pedophilia scandal had caused outrage, was a turning point. Pope Francis initially defended Chilean bishops against allegations. He covered up the crimes of an elderly priest, demanding the accusers to show proof of his guilt. He later admitted to making grave mistakes in the case. This was a first for a pope. He apologized in person. He summoned all of Chile's bishops to the Vatican and compelled them to resign.
Conozco el dolor que han significado los casos de abusos ocurridos a menores de edad. Y sigo con atención cuánto hacen para superar ese grave y doloroso mal. Dolor por el daño y sufrimiento de las víctimas y sus familias, que han visto traicionada la confianza que habían puesto en los ministros de la Iglesia.
In February 2019, in a historic first, Pope Francis defrocked former US Cardinal Theodore McCarrick after he was found guilty by a Vatican court of sexually abusing a teenager in the 1970s. The Pope also convened the heads of 114 bishop conferences from around the world with the head of the Eastern Catholic churches and superiors of religious congregations for a 4-day summit on the protection of minors. It heard devastating accounts from abuse survivors and searing criticism from within the church. The same year, Francis made it compulsory to report suspicions of sexual assault or harassment to church authorities and any attempt at a cover-up. There have been fewer scandals and revelations in recent years, but the pain of survivors and the repercussions for the Church continue to resound. In coming days, members of the Conclave will meet to choose a successor to Francis. How the new Pope handles such cases remains to be seen. So, who will be the next Pope? The decision will have a profound impact on the Catholic Church and the world's 1.4 billion baptized Roman Catholics. The College of Cardinals, comprising senior Catholic clergy, many appointed by Francis himself, will elect the next Pope. Some of the qualities an elected cardinal should possess include humility, zeal for the Catholic faith, and the promotion of goodness. The College of Cardinals report has identified 22 cardinals who it believes are papabili, or most likely to be elected pope. Cardinals below the age of 80 when the pope dies or resigns vote in what is known as the papal conclave. The voting process is kept secret. The conclave locks itself in the Sistine Chapel and deliberates on potential successors. It typically takes between 2 and 3 weeks for a pope to be chosen, though it can stretch slightly beyond that if cardinals struggle to agree on a candidate. Pope Francis's 12-year papacy was remarkable. He dedicated his service to the Church until the very day before he died. Pope Francis leaves behind a legacy of inclusion and activism. He frequently spoke in support of women, migrants, the marginalized, and the environment. Pope Francis was a pope of a very different kind. He did not live in a palace. Instead, he empathized and was deeply moved by those who lived on the edges of society.